afternoon and welcome to our small footprint. My name's Nyssa and we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. I have an overabundance of eggs at the moment. We've had the chooks and the ducks are laying well and we haven't been using as many lately. I'm not real sure why. But when I get an abundance of eggs, what I tend to do is make sourdough pasta. So I tend to make it in bulk and I roll it all out and put it in serving sizes in the freezer. Because it has egg in it, I'm not comfortable drying it and storing it dried. I like to store it in the freezer, and it's one of those few things that we purposely make space for in the freezer to allow for the ability to store it. In bulk also only means, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 serves, so it's not like it's a huge amount either. And we use Ziploc bags and reuse them. So we use a Ziploc bag with servings in them, and then once it's emptied it goes back in the freezer and we refill that bag and use it again. So I thought I'd bring you along while I'm making a batch. So I've already made up a couple of batches, but I need to make one more. So I'm going to bring you along to make the actual dough and show you the texture and stuff that I like to make it. And then I'll show you how I roll it out and cut it and hang it and store it. So the weather was fine, and it's now raining, which is never the greatest weather for rolling out pasta. The humidity tends to screw with the texture a little bit, but I got the ratios pretty good, and I'm fairly used to doing it now, so it's not too bad. I can compensate fairly well. But if you haven't made pasta before, I would suggest doing it on a nice dry day, because the humidity can cause some issues when you're rolling it out. It can cause it to stretch a bit and break off when you're hanging it to dry and things like that. But anyway, here we go. We'll mix up a batch and I'll show you how we do it, and then we'll get started. Alright, I use my Thermomix to mix my dough in, basically a food processor, same sort of thing. If you're interested in knowing more about a Thermomix, I'll put a link in the comments to a lady who does consulting here in Australia, who has a great Facebook page and stuff for all the details as well. So I will put her details in the comment section. So what I do for my pasta is I do 400 grams of plain flour, I do 3 whole eggs, which worked out to be about 170 grams in that, I just noticed, for reference if you need it. 30 grams of olive oil, and I know olive oil is one of those debated things about putting in your pasta, but I find it really helps to make the rolling out of it easier. And this pasta has a really, really soft mouthful. It's really lovely. And then starter. So then I do 100 grams of starter. Just gonna grab a spatula. Alrighty, 100 grams of starter. Now this starter's been in the fridge because I used most of it this morning, and I didn't want to feed it until I did this batch as well, so it's just a bit thick. You can use discard or starter, doesn't really matter. I'm going to feed that before I put that one away. Alrighty, so 100 grams of starter. So then we just stick it straight in the Thermomix, or if it was a food processor, you stick it on the machine, and then we'll take it over. Now I do speed 4, this is loud, so I don't know whether I'll use this speech over the top, but this is what it looks like when you go through. So that was just speed 4 for 10 seconds and it's all brought it together. Just like that. So now we're going to tip it out and bring it together into a ball. So now we just tip it out of the food processing bowl, or the Thermomix bowl in my case, onto the board, and then bring it together into a single piece. Like that. All we do is we bring it together. Now it's probably a little stiffer than a standard pasta dough, It doesn't come quite as homogeneous as you'd like, but you don't want it to, because we're going to ferment it. So once it's made into a fairly smooth ball, then I'm going to wrap it in cling wrap or a beeswax wrap or whatever I can find, and then we let it sit at room temperature for about 4 hours, and then after that it goes in the fridge for at least 24 hours. And I'll show you, because I've got some in the fridge to pull out now, what the difference is once that happens. So it kind of looks a little dry, doesn't look like it's holding together quite as well as it should, but it's holding together well enough that it's collected all the pieces together, and that's the main thing. So we've got all the dough in one fairly uniform ball. Now I think my beeswax wrap is being used, so I'm just going to grab some cling wrap. And a bit like pie dough, we're just going to put it into a bit of a disc and then let it sit at room temperature for 4-ish hours at least, and then stick it in the fridge. Just like that. So all done just like that. Alright, now I'm just going to put this up over here on top of the other dough, and then I'll grab one out of the fridge, and with the magic of video and YouTube you can see what it looks like. Alright, so this is straight out of the fridge, and you can see it's a much shinier, silkier looking dough, much smoother. So this needs to just sit out for 15 minutes to warm up a little bit. I should have brought it out a bit earlier, but I forgot about it. So I'm just going to let this sit for 15 minutes just to warm up slightly, and then we'll start working on it. Alrighty, I took a break long enough to roll out shape a dozen dough balls for pizza for dinner tonight. And now I'm back to this. So, can't find my metal dough cutter at the moment, which is fine. What we're just going to do is we're going to split this into a more manageable piece. So I'm just going to wrap that one up to keep it moist. And then I'll probably go in half with this again. And what I do is I use a little bit of flour, and I roll out the piece of dough to a bit of an oval shape so that it's got a thinner edge, a thinner point to be able to feed into the dough roller. So I use a KitchenAid dough roller. It's just a generic branded one, it's not a KitchenAid brand. I have done it by hand, but for uniformity it's definitely better to use a roller. So I use the roller for this, and I'll take you up to see what I do. Alright, so then what I do is I have it on the larger size, which is 8 on this one, and I feed it through the first time. Remember to keep my arm out of the way. Now it more than likely gets stuck the first time, especially if it's still pretty cool, because it's harder to go through. So don't get discouraged, it will go through, but it's being sourdough too, it's quite bouncy compared to a plain unleavened dough. So you just want to work it through. This one's being a little bit more difficult than normal. Work it through that first time. Something's getting stuck there by the looks of it. There we go. Alright. So we'll work it through the first time. And then we fold it into 3, like that. Give it a quick flatten out, like that, and then we take it back up to the roller. And I've turned it up slightly for this second run through. It's going through a lot easier this time. Alright, so that's on 8. And that's given us a nice smooth sort of a starting point. So then I drop it 2 at a time. So I go down to 6 next and take it through. And then to 4. And then to 2. And then I generally cut it in half before I take it through on one, because it's much easier to manage if you do that. The cutter's missing, which is here we go. So I generally cut it in half at that point and just lay them out, and then I take it down to 1 and run this through. And then the second piece down at 1 as well. There we go. So then we have the first lot done. Now, if you had a cutter for the KitchenAid, you could then feed it through the cutting blades. I don't have that, so I do it all manually. So I just have this little cutter here that I use for my crackers and things like that, and I just literally cut it into strips manually. So let me see if I can do this without getting in front of the camera. Just like that. I just sit there. They don't have to be particularly uniform. They just want to be in strips. Now you can do it the full length if you want, but the thing is that I'm going to hang this on a pasta drying rack, and the longer it is, the more weight there is in the pieces, and therefore the more likely it is that it's going to collapse off the stretch off the rack. So let me grab the rack. This is what I start with. This rack here. Excuse the mess behind me, but anyway. So this is the rack that I start with. I normally cook far more than will fit on this rack, but I start here. So then, because I use the cutter that I do, it's perforated but not necessarily completely sliced, so I can lay the whole thing over an arm and then just pull it apart so that it hangs and airs and dries out a little bit before we put it in the bags for in the freezer. So if you stuck it straight in the freezer right now, it would all stick together. You'd end up with a claggy mess. So you want it to have some sort of a skin on it to allow for it to be able to be packaged up. If you were cooking it, you could cook it straight from this though. So just like that. And we just fill the rack. We just keep on going and keep on filling the rack. Alrighty, so I filled the rack. which was about 1.5 of those batches of pasta. So I've still got some in the fridge and some, and the one that I made today that is fermenting. So tomorrow I will make the other 2 batches up. I would like a couple more of these hanging racks so I can do more at a time, but I haven't got around to it yet. I also wouldn't buy wood again in our climate because it's just too humid and everything goes mouldy, so I spend half my life vinegaring and scraping these wooden utensils to make sure that they don't go mouldy. So that's that. I will let it sit and dry for a bit, and then I will bag it up and I'll bring you back to see one of our favourite things that we make with the sourdough pasta. This has been on the bench for 4 hours and I'm getting ready to put it in the fridge, so I thought I'd show you. So the texture, it doesn't rise as such, but the texture definitely changes, so it ends up being silky. So all those cracks where it wouldn't hold together are now silky smooth. So that's what the fermentation does for it. So now I'm going to stick it in the fridge till tomorrow, and then I'll roll this one out tomorrow. Had the fan on to help dry the pasta a bit quicker because the flies and stuff are bad, keeps them off too. But you can see that it's no longer flexible, it's more rigid. So it just pops off the wrap nice and easy. So this will be Alrighty, as a bonus, we're going to make a meal with the sourdough pasta. So this is the next day, it's evening, so you have to excuse the lighting. There's no lights as such out here, so I'm using a lamp. So this is the pasta that was put in the freezer in a Ziploc bag. This is a 300 gram serve. And so it goes straight out of the freezer into the pot, and we just cook it from frozen, and then I put the Ziploc bag back with, and then I can put pasta in it next time. So the sauce we use is a dairy-free version of like the Jamie Oliver's Wonky summer pasta. So we have 3 egg yolks. We have a couple of heaped spoonfuls of basil pesto. We use I make a dairy-free one with cashew nuts and stuff. So there's that. Then I use a drizzle of the honey from my fermented garlic in honey. So I use a little drizzle of this, or sometimes I use the brine from my cowboy candy, but I don't have any at the moment. And then we have zucchini butter that I pulled out of the freezer, so I like to use some of that. A nice scoop of that gives it a creamy flavour, just like that. Then we use a little squirt of lemon juice, a little bit of salt, and a dash of olive oil. And we just bring that all together, just like that, into a sauce. And then once the water is boiling and I cook the pasta, we use the hot pasta and a little bit of the pasta water to cook this sauce. So you'll see the change in it when we add that to it. And then I have some smoked chicken that I'm just going to heat up and grill to put over the top of it. So I will get the pasta cooking, and I'll time it because I don't think I normally time it, I just taste it. So I'm going to time the pasta for you and tell you how long it took in the boiling water. Alrighty, so the pasta took 8 minutes. So what I've done is I have the pasta here in the pot. Now we don't drain it because we want the hot water to help cook these eggs. So all I do is I grab out pasta as well as I can, soft silky sourdough pasta, place it in the bowl, just like that. So you get all of it out, and you've got that little bit of pasta water going in there with it, which is nice hot water. It'll help loosen up the sauce as it thickens, because as the egg yolks cook, it thickens up like a carbonara type dish. And then we've got a little bit of excess water if we need it. So all we do from that point there is we just agitate it so that the heat is cooking the eggs. And as it cooks, it'll thicken. The zucchini butter does leave it a little bit thinner, but that just means we don't have to add any more of the pasta water because it's being loosened up by the zucchini butter. But as you can see, the sauce changes colour, it lightens up a little bit, it looks more creamy, and it thickens up as it cooks. So the longer you leave it, the thicker it tends to go. So sometimes I do this and then I go and grab bowls and things like that, and I come back and I decide to add a little bit more pasta water just because it's thickened up a little bit too much. It looks pretty good this time though. So there we go. So let me get this pot out of the way and grab some plates, and then we can plate it up. Alright, so as you can see, it's thickened up, it's sticking to the noodles nicely. That's the egg yolks being cooked. So then all we do is we plate it up. Make sure to get all the sauce as well. And then we have the smoked chicken that I just warmed up in some ghee to serve over the top. Like that. There we go. So I hope you found that helpful. Some ideas to use pasta with in a dairy-free way as well, but that showed how we go from start to finish of our sourdough pasta, dry it, freeze it, and have it ready to cook up in a meal that quickly. So 8 minutes to cook from, in this sort of a size, from frozen to ready, and it's a lovely soft silky mouthfeel pasta. It's really good. Alrighty, so I'll leave it at that and I'll talk to you next time.